shaped not just their individual identities, but also their writing. From language to themes to finding the balance between fiction and non-fiction. Can we now have on stage Çiler İlhan, Anjum Hasan, Jean-Noël Orengo, Mridula Koshy, and Sonam Wangmo Jhalani. This is I for Identity. And there's a cake in front of them. There you go. Happy. Happy. Begin? Okay. All right. So today we are in excellent company. We have writers from pretty much international writers, say, and deep thinkers. I might add, people who have deep inner lives and have lived a great many lives. We have Çiler, whose birthday we just celebrated, and you were actually born at 4 o'clock, you were saying today. Yes, at the exact same time. Yeah. Çiler is the editor-in-chief of Condé Nast Traveler in Turkey. She was the winner of the 2011 European Union Prize for Literature for her book Sirgon, also translated in 15 languages, including English, and in English it is known as Exile. Moving on, we have Anjum Hasan. Anjum Hasan has written great many books. Natty Natty, Lunatic in My Head, Difficult Pleasures, and most recently, The Cosmopolitans. She's also the recipient of the Man Asia Literature Prize, among many, nominated, but many other prizes as well you've received. And currently the book editor at The Caravan. We have Jean-Noël Orengo, the author of Le Fleur de Capital, which means the flower of capitalism in English. Again, several prizes, including the prize Prix de Fleur, recipient of the Mission Stendhal, and currently working on a project in Oroville, right? Based in Oroville, but I think characters that have some connection to India as well. And then last but not the least, we have Mridula Koshy, an acclaimed literary fiction writer as well. Her short collection, story collection, If It Is Sweet, won the Shakti Bhakti First Prize, and was also shortlisted for the Vodafone Crossword Book Award, and most recently written Bicycle Dreaming, exploring family life in a waste worker community in New Delhi. So I think the inevitable question that authors and writers get asked is this story your life experience? Are these characters, is this character you? And I think as seasoned writers, I wouldn't say that this is your life experience necessarily, but wouldn't it be fair to say that our writing is informed by our life experiences, that our identity is a collection or a combination of life experiences that inform our identity, our sensibilities, our sensitivities, and through perhaps the prism of our social identities, such as class identity, such as perhaps ethnic identity, or maybe even gender identity, that we write these stories. So I'm just going to open the floor and have anyone who'd like to just chime in. I'm not going to ask anyone specific, so if you'd like to address the question. Or should I start naming people? Yes, okay. Let's start with you, Çiler, because your book, Exile, is, for me, so interesting because you write in multiple voices, monologues representing multiple characters.
It's a very good question that you raised, because it's really a common thing that we get from readers. Even though it's a man character, they still want to associate us somehow with our character. If that was the case, then I would become a dog, a murderer, a victim. You know, I would become like a real schizophrenic personality. But there is, of course, it's true. Living in Turkey as a woman and going through some hardship, I wouldn't be another Barbara Cartland. I didn't become a Barbara Cartland. It's, of course, I am fed on my community, on my family life, and it is a part of what we do. But of course, we do have a wild imagination. On the other hand, thank God we do. Otherwise, we would become an activist or only a journalist. But that's what makes writers different from journalists or activists or NGO employees, because we put a lot of lies, nice lies in it. Sometimes they're wicked, sometimes they're nice, but we find a reality and sometimes we just get it and turn it into something, then it becomes literature. But is there a part of our heart, of our being in it? Sure it is, but you can never know which part it is.
Anjum.
I have to say that when I started writing my novels, it was a time when Indian writing in English was coming into its own, and there was this range of novels that were received very well, got very good reviews, were very widely read. Kiran Desai, Pankaj Mishra, Arundhati Roy, Raj Kamal Jha, and I think Amit Chaudhary, very notably. And I have to say that we all grow up reading a lot of Anglo-American fiction, and that is inevitably one of the main sources of our literary education. But for me as a writer, it was also very important that when I started writing in my first novel in the early 2000s, that there were also all these Indian voices who were telling stories about Indian realities, and often middle-class urban realities that I found quite similar to my own. And now, I didn't realize it then, but now when I look back at these novels, and almost in all of these cases, these were first novels, was that they were very strongly autobiographical. Most of these writers were writing about not memoirs. Yes, they were fictionalizing, but they were writing their own stories, and this was not because of a limitation of imagination, I think, because these were very gifted writers. It was because that story of that middle class existence of growing up, say in the late 70s, 80s, coming of age in the 90s, just had not been told. It hadn't been told in an Indian voice, in an Indian language which was English, or in an English that was Indian. So I think that influence was very significant for me, and my first novel, Lunatic in My Head, is not straightforwardly my own story, but it is the story of the town where I grew up. It is about characters that in one way or another are recognizable to me. And yes, I was drawing on things that I knew. And to cut a long story short, the third novel that I published last year is a movement away, I think, from telling my own story or telling the story of things that I know firsthand. It's about an older woman. It's about living in Bombay a little bit, which is a city I haven't lived in. It's about training as an artist. I haven't trained as an artist. It's about a series of relationships that she has, none of which that I've gone through. And again, I'm not doing all this because I want to not write about my own life. It's because I have a prior idea of what I want to express in fiction in this novel, and the best way to do it is through a character who's not very similar to me. And I think because Çiler is here and because I'm a big fan of Orhan Pamuk, and to bring in a slightly small Turkish note into the discussion, Pamuk is a wonderful, of course a wonderful novelist, but also a wonderful commentator on the art of the novel. And one of the things he says in this beautiful book about writing fiction, The Naive and Sentimental Novelist, he says that you should write about other people's lives as if they're your own life, that is your own life, and about your life as if it's someone else's life. And I think right now where I am in my writing career is exactly at the place that Orhan Pamuk recommends.
And Mridula, for your bicycle dreaming, was that your experience? I don't know, and I apologize for this because I don't know what your first novel was or is. Was that true to, or was it closer to your life experience? Because I know with Bicycle Dreaming, it's about a young 13-year-old girl, Noor, and you know, for someone who's just reading it, and it's someone who lives sort of in the fringes of society. Her father is a kabari wala. What was that experience like for you? Did you live her life? How did you extract that life experience? And how did it become your life experience?
I think one of the things I like about my work as a writer, about the job of writing, so this I think might be true for all writers, possibly, that we get to have it both ways all the time. And I don't want to sound like I'm equivocating, but of course our writing comes from our experiences, as Anjum said, and of course it's not about you know, just our experience. So if I were to answer the earlier question very broadly, I would say that my writing is a record of my curiosity, which is always much bigger than my experiences. I mean, it's always about trying to figure out something that I don't know. And so at the end of each time I've written a book, at the end of, you know, like the 3 years it took to write it, I could always start and write the same book over again, and I would know so much more and perhaps write a better book, but I'm no longer curious. So it doesn't matter. I don't remember who, one of our eminent speakers earlier said something about, you know, the important thing is to write. It's not how talented you are or if you have a great idea. And many, many more people can possibly write than do, because ultimately the discipline counts for a lot. And I couldn't possibly come up with a discipline to sit for 3 years with things I know and like take, you know, dictation from the voice in my head that's telling me what's what. So as for the little girl in Bicycle Dreaming, I'm, as many literary fiction writers are, very curious about the form in which I'm working, sort of the working conditions of our job. We are handed a particular form. Other people have written or not written books, and then we're speaking into the silences or amplifying things we agree with or arguing against things we agree with. And something I was very curious about within novel writing was the question of, can you write about people who are ordinary? And I don't mean base workers' children, kabadiwala's children. That's a separate question, the question of class in literature. I was curious about the unremarkable character. So I, as a child, I wouldn't say I was remarkable, but I was like, you know, full of pain and like laughably so. And my young girl is not. She's like super sturdy. She's 13. Things happen to her, and half the time she doesn't even process them, whereas I was an overprocessor. So in literature, we have a lot of characters who look like writers, because I think this is fair to readers, that they would almost look at us and wonder if it's us in books, because we write these oversensitive, beautiful children who are in pain, and many of them grow up in the book to become writers. And my young girl would never do that. I think she's going to continue living her
I thought that was a
ordinary life.
I thought that was an interesting approach, because as you say in your interviews that literature is mostly about exceptional characters, doing exceptional things, and you essentially taking a different platform with your story. That's good to know. But let's move on to Jean-Noël. I think it's a moot point to say that at least in this forum, that in our little group, that we should write what we know. I think it's more appropriate to say maybe we should write what we don't know about what we know.
How can I answer about that? First, I want to say when I start to think about the subject of our session, my first thought was about reading. The fact is, reading has done more for shape my life, my identity, and even, of course, my work than other experiences that happened to me. Even a difficult experience, even interesting experience. And first, that helped me to understand I am maybe more interested about what happened to the others than mine. And in a second step, of course, that gave me the desire to be a writer myself, to join the club, in fact. But so in the second time, the process began again when I started to write. Most of the thing since 20 years now, most of the thing that happened to me, it's because I want to write. In fact, it's a kind of circular process. It's because I want to write that I have some experiences. This is why I started to travel. This is why I met some people, and so this is the cycle process. Read, write, then leave some experience because you want to write on it. Then you write on it, and then you leave the consequences of the publication of your book.
Okay. I think for me, you now raise the next question, which is, when we're writing about. First of all, let me just back it up by saying that I think it's curiosity, maybe a sense of connection to a certain type of feeling that we write. But for you, it's travel and through meeting people and through reading. And how important is research, for your writing, to write about something that we don't know at all and that you're very curious about? How do you go about doing your research, and what's the process for you?
Well, my first book was published last year, but it took me 8 years to collect all the documents about that. Not only the documents, but the experience of the city. Maybe I must to say that the subject of the book is the city of Pattaya in Thailand, which is in the same place and in the same time one of the most most popular seaside resort in the southeast of Asia for family tourists, and also, of course, the capital of the sex tourism, but a freedom place for transgender, for gay, for lesbian, and this is, in fact, that interested me a lot. And also a crazy place for real estate market with a huge complex condominium, high-rise building. So I think our responsibility is to have time, to take time, to listen, to observe, and then to take it into our book. Okay. The fact of time, the importance of to take time to do that.
To process it.
Yes,
yeah. Yeah. And Çiler, but your experience writing your monologues, how were you inspired to do that? If you could just tell us, I don't want to say what we talked about yesterday, but if you could just tell us your inspiration for stories like, there's one that really struck me and stays in my memory, is the story of the jellyfish baby. If you could talk to us more about that.
That actually brings me to research as well, because I just lose myself doing research. and maybe I'm too obsessed sometimes, and then I have to drag myself back to fiction. When I was writing Exile, it just one thing took me to the other, and then one thing, and I found this apparently in a land that is far to us, called Micronesia. There was big laboratories doing nuclear scientific experiments, and then the kids affected by it, they were born. They are born apparently like really with some missing arms and in a horrible state where mothers even can't look. First, I thought when I saw this, I just couldn't believe that it was happening, and it's very interesting because it is a okay, now everything is connected, we are connected, we know a lot about a lot of things, but then there are really a lot of things that we don't know either. And when I think when I do research, I just come across with a new open, sometimes it's painful, sometimes it's nice, with a new window, then that just motivates me to write, and sometimes just curses me because it just doesn't leave me alone until I write about it.
And Anjum, what about you? Because I think with Cosmopolitans, you said that it took you 6 years to do it. And was this because of research work or technical aspects, or you just, I'm not sure what the reasons would be, but if you could just enlighten us, please.
I can't say that I write very research-driven novels. I think curiosity, the word that Mridula used, is a more appropriate one. If in the process of writing the book there's something I need to find out about, I'm driven by curiosity, I will go and read up on it. But my novels tend to be about the people in them. They're very much driven by the inner life and the expanse of the subjectivity of that character. So for me, it's not research so much as allowing that character to grow within me. And then that character becomes the sort of channel, if you like, or the receptacle through which everything I experience passes through. And it doesn't matter what it is. It could be walking down a street, it could be taking a trip, it could be a relationship, but everything's being processed doubly. It's being processed by me, but it's also being processed by this character, and it may or may not become a part of his or her life. And it's interesting that this panel is about identity, assuming that we're talking about the author's identity in relation to her work. But sometimes you feel as a writer, because you have lived with so many characters over so many books, that you're not even sure who you are anymore, very specifically, and why does it matter? And I think it's really when you finish the book and you're sitting on a panel like this, that you have to try and answer that question of how do you separate yourself from the work, and is it you in the work? Because sometimes you don't even know if you're doing very much more year after year, but sitting at your desk and writing. And I just said in the panel before this that we were talking about a book of largely autobiographical essays, and I said it's amazing that many of the contributors have written very, very personal stories, and I find it very hard to do that, partly because I feel I don't really have that much to share, and I really need to hoard the little that I have, because I'm going to have to expend it over so many books. And partly because all that I've seemed to be doing is sitting at a desk and writing, or being on a panel like this and talking about sitting at a desk and writing. So,
Mridula, what about you? Is research something that you do? You made an interesting point in your interview where you said, you know, writing is research, that it's the process of discovery, and when you're writing, it is research for you. But could you tell us more what you meant by that?
Sure. Well, I think the more I'm curious about something, the more I'm trying to figure it out. And in the end, maybe a little bit like what Jean-Noël was saying about needing or having to write. Part of that process of trying to figure something out becomes the act of writing, because it's extremely frustrating to not be able to kind of answer the question, and writing allows you to answer. It forces you to answer the question. It can be a very unsatisfactory answer, at the end of which you might want to discard it, and not because it's not a good book or something, but just because you still don't know. I mean, you still don't know what you set out to know, but what I found, because I started writing much later in life than many of my peers, I didn't start in my teens or my 20s. I started in my mid-30s. That all those years of not writing were just fine, but now it was time to write, because it was getting increasingly difficult to live with not having some sort of place where I have to answer my questions. So yeah, writing is an act of, in a way, answering the question. And as for actual research, like reading and going and finding out things, I think everybody has to do it so we can be honest, so we can be trustworthy, so that we can be respectable to ourselves. And for me, I know this about myself, that I don't feel confident to write if I haven't done some amount of homework. I might do homework just as a way to get started, and then do more homework as I'm working. And I also know from having done bad writing that if the homework is in the writing, it's bad writing. And it's much better if it's just like the iceberg and it's all underwater. Maybe somebody else said that and I'm just repeating it.
It's Ernest Hemingway, actually.
May I just add to what she said? I think it's very correct. Sometimes I just do research like hours and I read 10 books, 20 books, but then maybe I never use it, but I consume it, I make it a part of me, and then it becomes more real. Then I process it as a writer, but I just have to know them. I just don't need to talk about them.
Yeah, sometimes it takes a while. You have this one draft or many drafts, one story that you've worked on with research, and it just doesn't come, and you have to set it aside and go back to it.
I think I'm a lot more like Anjum, and it was a frustration of mine early on because it ended up becoming very gendered in the writing world to be someone who writes about a kind of a small, okay, so maybe I'm not speaking for you, Anjum, anymore, but like I have this small terrain I cover, and I have to make it last for however many more books, but I haven't run out of my curiosity about that terrain, and so it's really been about just digging deeper over and over again, and having different tools, different forms, reading more so that I can use the things I've read, which are not research things I've read, but like somebody else's novel will teach me how to write the novel I need to write to answer the question that I'm trying to answer. So there's all sorts of research, the walking down the street and seeing the world through not only your character's eyes, but seeing your character around the corner from you. Yeah, and that stuff is so much more interesting to me now that maybe it's an act of growing older and growing more confident as a writer, that I'm no longer anxious that I don't write novels about far away and elsewhere and that require me to get on a plane. I've never written a novel that required me to get on a plane or even go to like the bowels of some national research center or hold a microscope to a painting.
Yeah, which is a different experience for you, Jean, because you do get on the plane and you do go to do your research. Is that correct or not?
Yes, but no, not. I completely agree with you. You know, first I am a reader before a writer. You know, and I must confess I have more pleasure to read than write sometimes. You know, and all the time, in fact. So the origin is really the act, the reading, the act to read, and if I start to travel, is because very basically I earn enough money in my 30s, and then I can start that. But and it was to be, how can I explain that? Maybe because I have a lack of insurance about what I write. I really need to see and to know and to talk and to meet and to understand what happened about that subject, and it's only for that.
Okay, so I'm going to shift gears a little bit, unless you wanted to say something.
No, I wanted to shift gears as well, and bring up something that this conversation reminds me of, and I think it's the third point in the triangle between identity and research. And I think the third thing, especially when we're talking about writing in India, perhaps everywhere else too, is authenticity. And if you're writing out of an identity that is not your own, you're writing about another class, you're writing about another community, is it enough to have researched, can you make that leap of imagination and write about people who are not you? And what is a measure of success when you're doing that in fiction? And I think I faced this question when I was writing my first novel, which is set in the small town where I grew up, Shillong. And it's impossible, I think, to write about Shillong without writing about the fact that it's made up of so many different communities, speaking different languages and interacting in interesting ways, but still leading very separate lives. And I thought, okay, I'm going to write a novel where I'm going to give equal space to all these voices, and it's going to be this great novel where the city comes alive. And of course, a novel is not that kind of equal opportunities kind of document. It is a subjective thing. And readers have very, very different responses to it, and some did feel that I wasn't fair, or I wasn't authentic, or some characters did not come out as well as others did, and maybe that was because of who I was, which community I came from. So I'm constantly aware of this, and I think you have to be in India if you at all ever make an attempt to write about somebody coming from a place that is not yours. And therefore, I think the corollary to all of this is the writer's outsider. How valid or invalid is the position that you might take as an outsider writing fiction?
Çiler, you, as we were saying earlier, you write about multiple people. Have you faced any criticism about the authenticity of the voices?
No. I'm lucky, maybe. I didn't. Because I think that's why in the beginning you said because our writings are attached to a feeling that we maybe associate with, and it doesn't have to be us living that life, but I might catch a feeling there, and as a writer I might be able to explain it through different words. But if that is not sincere, let's say I want to write a big book, I want to be a bestseller, and I'm talking about things that are not sincere, then maybe you might be in trouble with yourself.
What about you, Mridula? Have you faced any criticism on authenticity of your character?
I think in Indian writing in English, this question is a constant, and the language you use, who you write about, the fact of your existence in English, and so on, the entire body of work. So I've in the last 3 books discarded more and more this line of enquiry is a polite word for it, because what has come to matter to me is not whether I am authentic, or if someone finds me authentic, or if it should be allowed that I write what I write. Because I write from my curiosity, I allow myself to answer my questions in writing. What's mattered to me, and it's been a really painful thing, is the lack of accountability in writing. So the people who hold me accountable, I don't find them necessarily the people who should be holding me accountable. I do write outside my class. My subject is not people from my own class, but the people who critique my writing are. And so we just kind of go round and round in our little circle, and it's not very productive at the end of the day. Indian writing in English is very small. There's a handful of us who write and a handful of us who read, and we may move out into the world if we are translated into other Indian languages. It doesn't happen. It hardly happens. It's sort of the great tragedy of Indian writing in general, not just in English, but in all of our languages. We don't do enough cross-pollination. And so our language doesn't change, and forget our themes, our language doesn't change, and that's our tool. So, and even the form and so on. We might move a little bit out if some of us find a publisher outside the country, and that's its own whole other kind of lack of accountability or authenticity, because it puts its own set of pressures. You want to be pleasing your American readership or explaining yourself in ways you wouldn't. So those things get hashed out perhaps in other panels. I just want to throw out the word accountability and how important it is in Indian writing in all languages, and especially in English, because as small as it is our language, and it is a dominant language in this country in terms of the power it wields. So those of us the handful of us who wield it and then hold each other to task because you weren't authentic enough, or how dare you write about something you don't know, or whatever it might be, that it behooves us to try to figure out how can more people enter this stream of literature, and that's also a whole other thing.
I just want to shift gears a little bit and talk about our identity in the type of worlds that we live today, in the type of global nomadic world where some of us have lived abroad or have lived many lives even within the country. I mean, what are our identities now? Is it a state of confusion for us? Is it that as you were saying in terms of accountability, that perhaps that our identities sort of coalescing into one? I'm not sure. Is it sort of becoming a similar identity?
Well, it's a large question. That is dependent of many things. In fact, for example, if you are into a mixed couple, if your wife or your husband come from another country, another culture, that feed your identity, and it's very important for that. That is dependent of your country too. For example, in France, actually, we have a crisis, an identity crisis, because many factors about religion, but in fact, maybe the real factors is economical and social factors. So my identity is a process. In fact, it's not closed. It's always open. And as a citizen, as a French, as a traveler, as a foreigner, when I stay in Thailand, and with my relation with some immigrant in France, and
I'm going to try and answer the question from the point of view of literature, because I think one of the presumptions about how literature is created is that there's a sort of equivalence between language, nation, and the novel or any narrative, that you belong to a nation, you write in the language of that nation, and you tell the story of that nation. And that is the dominant way in which we think of literature. And in India, we sort of replicate that in all the little countries that exist within India. So you write in Hindi about people who speak the language or live in that language reality, and you tell their story. Or similarly with Tamil or Marathi, whatever language we're talking about. Now, in this particular way of imagining literature, writing in English is a very strange thing to be doing, because it doesn't correspond to this way of thinking about the equivalence between land and language and storytelling. But the fact is that half the world was colonized, and this historical reality somehow doesn't seem to have affected the way in which we think about the creation of literature. There was a disruption. New languages were learned, which were not native languages, and then people started expressing themselves in those. And so how do we think of this disruption, given that Indians have been writing in English for 150 years at least? And to me, it's strange that we still think of it as, again, that horrible word, authentic versus inauthentic. And therefore I brought up early in the discussion the word outsider, because I think even as we are using the language, we have, all of us who are writing in English, however well traveled we are, even if we don't live in India, there's always something at the core. And maybe core is geographically, I don't mean that it's the deepest, but it's somewhere in our being, another, within quotes, Indian reality that we're responding to, and we express that in our stories. So I think all of these disjunctions should come into the way we look at our use of the language and the way we tell our stories. And I think actually, I can't remember who it was who called the novel the great form of outsiderness, which is a completely different way of looking at writing fiction from the other model that I presented. And I think we don't exploit that outsiderness enough, or it's not recognized enough for its creative value. Because it's one thing to have lived a particular life, however rooted, and it's another thing to recreate that in fiction. And we forget the artifice in creating that life as a story. So I think to say that it's about the outsider writing is to remind ourselves that all stories in the written form are an instance of artifice. So to me that, or maybe all of that I'm saying is just my way of surviving as an Indian writing in English, and finding a way, a basis on which to go, from which to continue.
And Çiler, you in Turkey, so what do you write? I don't think you write in English. Do you write in English?
I write in Turkish. Yes.
Okay. And are they similar?
Well, some of the
issues?
discussions that has been going on here about Indian literature, those are really not relevant to Turkey, because there are only a few writers. Even Orhan Pamuk, his English is really almost like a native speaker, but he's not writing in English, he's writing in Turkish. Elif Shafak is one of the few writers who's writing in English originally, whom I don't really value that much, by the way. But for us, we just write in Turkish. We are very Turkish, we write in Turkish. I'm lucky to be able to say a few words on my English editions, but the thing is, in Turkey, these are not relevant, but I just want to say something else. Maybe even though we are sure of our identity, if we have like a solid image of our identity, I think the literature and the world is open to judgments very much. For example, when I appear, or when you look at my book, there are a few etiquettes that you would just go and stick on me. Turkish, woman, Oriental. So you know, in competitions, that's why the judges, they don't read the biography of the writer, because then maybe you're not that objective when you're reading something.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we just have enough time for a few questions. 5 minutes. Yeah.
Çiler, this is actually for you. You mentioned very briefly about when your work is translated, and you said you have a bit of a say. I was really curious as to when your words don't become yours when they're translated into the language. How do you feel when you read them?
I feel like my baby is taken away. No, it's a very good question, because I've been lucky to be translated into many languages, and I really have no idea what these books are saying. I'm sure they're saying things close to me, but there are some words that in English I can go back to my translator. No, this you should use a more local word, or you should use a rural word. And there are places where I don't really mean this. You know, I just pick up the phone and tell her, you know, this is how I felt when I write it. So it is very difficult, I think, to be translated, but it's a must, because we still cannot communicate with brain frequency here in this planet yet. Maybe we do, we're not aware of it, so we need to use the words, and when they become translated, they lose some meaning, but which is still great, so that I'm here with you today.
My question is for Mridula and Anjum. I was wondering whether you would think that you would still get questions of authenticity if you were men.
That's an interesting one.
I can't say, because I'm not a man. I don't know. I don't think it's a gender-related question at all. It's an anxiety about who we are and how that image of who we are appears on the page, how it's reflected back to us. So I really don't think it's to do with whether it's a man writing or a woman writing.
I mean, who knows, right? But I agree with you. First, it is about general anxiety we in India have about what we're doing with the business of being ourselves and what that might be. But it goes without saying that as a woman writing, I'm always aware of the scrutiny that women are subjected to and that men are not, because our intellect is in question. So whatever the question is, whatever the other question is, it gets twinned with and prismed through the question of, are you being smart enough, or are you worth reading as a woman? And so if you're writing, so the very first thing that happened to me was I was writing short fiction. There was at that time in India very few, or almost no, I would say like 1 or 2 literary journals you could submit to. So I was submitting abroad, and very early on I ran into these, into some websites for American journals that repeatedly used the words or the phrase domestic fiction, and said, if your fiction is domestic fiction, I mean, I read the stuff about, we don't accept genre fiction, and I was fine with that. And then there would be this little corollary thing, and I had to like look at my fiction and go, oh, is this domestic fiction? And what is, so Ian McEwan writes domestic fiction, but that's not domestic fiction, and when do I get to be muscular, and so on and so on and so on. So I think being a woman is very much a part of this experience of being questioned, found authentic or not.
I think we have time for just one more question.
I've got a microphone in my hand. Could I just thank all of the panel for being so open and wise about the writing process in particular. Thank you very much. But this question probably is aimed a little bit at Mridula, but to all of you. Mridula in particular spoke about writing as a process of answering questions. Do you ever find answers?
No, I said that I'm typically frustrated with the answer I've found, but satisfied that I answered, as opposed to all those years when I didn't. You go to sleep at night and you have these genius thoughts that never go anywhere. And I'm not even talking about the product, although the product is supremely satisfying. To have a book in your hand, to be able to hand it to someone else, to possibly be translated and misunderstood is not a bad deal at all. But it is not a satisfactory answer to the question of who are we as Indians, and so I'm always trying to read and figure out what other people are also saying, and where do I fit in in this collective sort of questioning that's going on.
Well, I think the nice things about novels, unlike life, is that they have resolutions, however provisional. So I think that's one of the joys. We've been talking a lot about the pains of writing, and I think to me that's one of the joys, that you can create a narrative that ends at some point and provide some kind of answers for the characters. And if that wasn't possible, then I think it would be very hard to continue writing.
Thank you. I don't think we have more time, but thank you to the audience for coming, and thank you to our panel of authors. Thank you. Thank you very much. Our next speaker, Pico Iyer, will speak of